Hello, hello everyone. Screen. Please let me know if you can see the screen. I'm sharing. All right, then I think we can start. It's almost 5 minutes after, so yeah, let's go for it. So first of all, thank you very much for the joining. My name is Radek from CloudBooster. I'm CTO and co-founder of CloudBooster. And today this webinar will be about practical guide to Azure automation. Basically, we'll be speaking about, like I will be speaking and showing you about how to migrate to Azure with your workload from on-premise or from anywhere else, and how to utilize automation properly to save time and money, which are the crucial resources that all of us have in the companies. So first of all, bit of the agenda. So we will start with what's the problem and why the projects actually slipped. Yeah, why the automation and migration project actually went away with the timeline, with the budget and everything. Then the second part will be a bit about the automation essentials. What are the good things to keep in mind when automating the migration, automating your workloads? And we're going to look on what could be actually the impact. Yeah, I will share some insights from my project we done with the company in the past during migration of big enterprises across the globe. And then we follow with the best practices checklist. That's a couple of tips to share with you what to think about during the migration. And one of the last things would be where we as a Cloudbooster fits in the migration, where we can help you. And afterwards, we're gonna just have the place for questions. So you can freely ask in the chat for sure. Meanwhile, there's Roman from Cloudbooster. He's our colleague, and he can respond to you together with me. But there will be a dedicated slot at the end of the presentation. All right. So what's the problem actually? Yeah, why the migration projects usually are in the companies, I wouldn't say the hated ones, but the ones that are that people looks from them a bit scared about like how they could end up. Yeah, like they are usually like three pillars of the migrations and the things that can went to different ways. First is the people, second is the technology, and first is the expectations. Yeah. And from the people perspective, or like the not the technological one, but the human one, it's usually like a lot of things about the unknown dependencies. Yeah, because when you're migrating usually the stuff from on-premise or from some legacy workload, it might happen that people that build that software or these components are not already in the companies. You may experience that already. And that could make the stuff really hard for migration. Yeah, because when you are doing the migration, it's hard to find out all the hidden routes for the applications that they are there and the edge cases that needs to be covered. Yeah. The second one is the learning curve. Yeah. All the time during the migration, if the team it's not fully constructed from the people which work with the Azure for a long time, there is some learning. Yeah. And this learning is great, but during the migration, it could make the calendar and the time and expectations bit blow up. Yeah, because if the people learning, that's great, but there are errors, there are things that needs to be changed in the after the migration, and that could blow up the timeline. And last but not really, but really important thing is the focus, because usually we have stuff to do in the companies, and you have stuff to do, and you have product, you have business, there are priorities from the business that you need to work on to maintain the current stack, and that comes with the focus. Yeah, so usually keeping the focus on the migration to really spend time on it and not be distracted by other things on a very schedule, it's a hard thing to do. We can, right now there is a poll coming on about the blind spots that cause the biggest schedule overrun. I can already see the answers, so we can look on them. There are a couple of answers. Hidden dependencies, yes, of course, that's the thing that kills us usually. Azure learning curve. Azure is like really intuitive in a lot of things, but anyway, it takes some time especially in the hardening and policies and digging up to the specialties. And team is juggling with the other priorities. Great. All right, yeah, so it's a common topic everywhere, basically. And in the second pillar, that's the technological thing. It's not about only the people, but also about technologies. Like you may already seen the projects, or you were maybe thinking about it, like what could be the best way to approach it. Usually there are like two ways to approach the migration. One is lift and shift, and second is like basically reworking everything from the scratch. Yeah, like doing things cloud native. That's one of the buzzwords around cloud, around Azure. The thing is that doing everything cloud native takes a lot of time, and doing that you need to maintain your old legacy stack, which is not all the time suitable. So lift and shift occur to be like great solution, which actually it is, but it needs to be done really wisely. Yeah, because otherwise, if it's not done wisely and it's just like lift and shift really that you take what you have on the legacy system and you migrate it to the Azure, you end up in serious troubles with your bills and with how the software actually works, because it's a different approach with the Azure, with all the stuff. Yeah, with the compute and how the things works, it's built differently. The second one is the manual landing zones. Yeah, basically, maybe now you are thinking, what's the landing zone actually? It's also like one of the buzzwords you can see everywhere. It's like the well architect framework, landing zones, and all of these words are popping up around us in the world of Azure. But basically, a landing zone you can imagine is your subscription resource group, network, and the baseline before you start deploying any actual workload which is running your applications. And this is the thing that you need to do again and again with every workload, because you are splitting them into multiple resource groups, into multiple subscriptions to fulfill the security requirements. And then you need to do all of the landing zone stuff again and again. If you don't have proper guidelines how to do it, I do automate it. It takes a lot of time, and also then there's a drift between these landing zones if they are stuck manually, because we as a people have a great intentions, but if we are doing something manually, sometimes we forget, which is totally human, but it happens. And last but not for sure least important is the resource power and cost behind the forgotten resources and open resources. It's not. It could seem that this is the topic only of like actual like ongoing running workloads in the Azure, that you orphan some resources or you forget something there. But actually, it's happening also during the migration, because the migration usually is not like first time deploy, everything works, but it's like iterative process where you deploy it in some POC form, then you iterate on it to the production grade deployment. And during these steps, which are super nature to do and they make sense, sometimes happen that these POC resources are orphaned, and then you are just like looking on the cost with sad eyes that there is like 25% more in the cost that you will expect it or you had in the calculations. What actually that costs exactly, that's what I already mentioned, is the landing zone build. Yeah, it's not only about the errors that you can get to it and the drift between the different landing zones, but also about the time. Yeah, because migrations are really time-intensive processes, like intense things to do, especially if you have a lot of applications. Usually, like mid-size enterprise companies have like 20 plus different services running on inside the companies. And in that case, when you need to set up the landing zone for each of them, it means a lot of man hours that needs to be done there. And if it's done manually, you are basically not focusing on the product or on the features that you need to deploy, and just on the baseline setup. That same comes with the networking and security. Again, it's the same topic, just forwarded more to the network and security topic. It's happening all the way there. With workload hardening, that's a great thing to keep in mind, and I believe everyone, I hope everyone during the migrations is keeping that in mind. Like migrating to the Azure, it's one part, but then the hardening and making the deployments really production grade is the another total region. So yeah, what actually, and that's about the problem, yeah. What actually the automation can solve there, because usually the automation is mentioned only during like maintaining existing workloads, deploying like greenfield stuff on your Azure environment. But usually, but actually, like it could be really greatly utilized during the migrations. If you have multiple applications, like 20 plus services, the automation comes really in a place, because usually like 70% of the workloads that are migrated are in some way similar. Yeah, so it's like Java application, it's like 10 Java applications written in some way, 5, I don't know, front-end applications, and you can find the patterns between them. Yeah, they are using this type of database, they are running in this way, and you can basically divide your applications in these categories. And that means like if you have like 70% of applications similar, that's a place where you can save money and time, because you basically need to do during the migration setup of the worker for all these applications from the scratch. Yeah. And if you will automate it, basically script it in some way, yeah, through Terraform or Bicep or any other code infrastructure as code tool, you can save a lot of time deploying that, and also get rid of the human mistakes that we usually do. What are the things that could be automated, or like are the first like things to look on to be automated? Because it's also not best thing to automate everything, because then you can came to the rabbit hole of automating every smallest thing that you have, and that could cause just extra time without added value. So it's also great to think to keep it in mind and just really automate the things that you have in some broader use. And that's basically most of the time the landing zones, as mentioned. So subscription creation, resource group creation, network creation, policies, tech rules, yeah, and this basic setup of the environment, and then the patterns that you identify in your workload or in your services to be created. So if you most of the applications that you are using are running on VMs and they are running on Windows VMs, you can automate, you can create a template of a VM scale set which will be deploying Windows servers using some network that you created before in the landing zone. Yeah, or it could be AKS cluster creation, anything at the end. It's basically about identifying the patterns that you have in the workload and automating creation of those environments for them. Also, for sure, with databases and storage, that's something that usually it's similar, because there are a couple products, there are a lot of products in the Azure stack, and they could be automated too. In terms of what actually we are talking about in terms of the cost and the time, because I'm sometimes mentioning cost, but it's also the time and vice versa, yeah, because time costs us money in the companies and otherwise, yeah. When we are building the environments, in good case, the basic landing zone setup could take like 5 man days in a good estimate. Yeah, of course it could be less, it could be more, but I would say based on the average data, it's around 5 man days, and it's kind of one-off process, because if you wouldn't create a template from it, how to do it, then you get into doing that again and again from the scratch, which means that you spend these 5 man days on that every time. If you automate that, and that could be in a lot of ways, it could be Terraform modules, it could be Bicep modules, it could be anything at the end. That doesn't matter that much. There are better solutions, there are worse solutions, but the important thing is to automate that, because then you can have at least this baseline for the project automated, and you can utilize it for every workload you have, and you can at the end ended up spending on that less than a day. Yeah, because if you have the properly automated, it's a matter of hours, not days. Just showing that on some data. So if we were gonna talk about the data, like and the hours, as mentioned on previous slide, like the basic landing zone setup could be up to like around 5 man days, which is approximately 40 hours. Then you have the network setup, then you have the workload deployment, and then you have the tagging. All of this, if you will automate, you will end up saving like a lot of hours. Yeah. In terms of the example, yeah, from real life, one of the projects in past, when exactly this is like great example to show on, is one of our previous US clients. Like I would say it's SMB to enterprise, like smaller enterprise company, which had over like 20 in the first migration segment when we were doing there. They had over like 20 different services, yeah. But there were 20 different services of a backend, and then other systems. Like in total, it was about like 40 to 60 services, yeah. And if you will do the numbers on that, it means that if we're gonna spend like 5 man days doing the landing zone environment setup for each of these service, it's gonna be around like 600 man days, which is a lot, even especially if you wanna do that in some like normal timeline. Yeah? If you don't want to, if usually like in 3 or 6 months, then it requires a lot of engineers. If you're gonna automate that, and if there are like templates created for landing zones, then it could be like downstream to 1 man day, and that could end up like in 80% reduction, which is like in these numbers already like huge saving, okay, in terms of like the money of the company and like time that you can save on it. And exactly from the people perspective, like if you have the deadline and if you want to do it like in 3 months, because usually migration is a thing that cannot be dragged forward like for a couple years or couple like months, because you ended up managing 2 systems instead of ones, and that create another overhead. Yeah, so usually the migration is the thing that you want to do like fast as possible in still the good manner or the quality, but you don't want to end up maintaining for long time 2 systems, because this creates extreme overhead. So if we're gonna just count the 600 man days, it will be required like to be done that in 3 months, 12 weeks, around like 10 engineers, yeah, which the company had that in the time, but the problem is that like these 10 engineers could spend time on something different, yeah, which will bring actually some new value for the business, not just like maintaining the current stack. If that will be automated, and it was automated in the end, and the templates for the landing zone for the workloads were created, it ended up being like around 100 man days, yeah, and it could be done still within the same deadline, within the same 3 months, just with 2 engineers, yeah. So there is like huge time to spend. And exactly. The landing zones are just one thing, and I'm speaking about them a lot. But as I already mentioned in the previous slides, it's not only about them, it's also about the compute, the workload, because that's actually where the application is running. It's not about the landing zone only, but also about the databases. And one of the things which is forgotten a lot in the migrations, and at the end, not only in the migrations, but in the infrastructure and like managing the environments in the companies, it's the ticketing. Because when you are already grown company, you ended up having different departments for different segments of your business, of your infrastructure, and that means that these departments need to communicate between each other. You may experience it for sure. So you are part of one department, but if you need something from the other, for example, network setup, you need to create a ticket, which is fine, but it creates another prolongings. Yeah, like these creating of the tickets, waiting for the reply of the other team creates another prolonging. So at the end, like it could add like many days on top of like the actual engineering work that could be done. And there we are coming to the fact that automation is like the first pillar. The second is end-to-end automation. Yeah, because if you automate basically creation of the separate things like landing zone, workload, and the database, that's awesome. You save a lot of time, but you still need to communicate between the departments to execute these automations, basically. But if you create end-to-end automation, so basically templates of Java application deployed on EKS, you can have one automation doing all of the deployment for you without needing to do separate tickets for everything, and that could save another lot of time. Where are the gains? Yeah, maybe already visible from it, based on the time that I showed there and based on the numbers. But I think it's really about like not the fact that like just saving the time because us, but we all of us have as engineers, as a CTOs or the companies, as a CEOs, stuff to do, and we need to the end goal is to help our business. Yeah, because we on the infrastructure side are not the ones usually making the business. Yeah, we are just the enabler for developers, for the product teams to create the applications, to create the software that actually creates the income for the company. Anyway, for that, we need to be present there and we need to support them. And if we can save a time on managing the infrastructure that's already running and the applications that are running, or on the migration of these applications, that means that we can increase the time that we are spending on actually the product features. And by that, like increasing the whole revenue of the company. And together with that, if we are able to do the things faster and with less people, it also forward the launch dates. Yeah, which makes all the time the things a bit more nicer if the migration could be done instead of in 6 months, in 2 months. Yeah. Couple of things like 6-step automation playbook. That's just really high level things which are great to be kept in mind during automation and during thinking about how to automate the infrastructure. One of them, or first of them, is baseline landing zone templates. That's the lowest building block that you have in a cloud. Yeah. On top of that, you can build everything else, your workloads, compute, databases, queues, everything else. But the baseline is the landing zones. Then the really important part, policies and guardrails. It's great to give teams and to give people freedom in your environments, but it's great also to control the most important things in terms of the security, because we need to be compliant. And if these policies are set up manually, there's again extra time. All of this could be baked into building blocks together with the landing zone. Infrastructure as code. That's basically the way how to do it. There are multiple ways to do it. There are multiple tools for automation and for making the infrastructure as code. One of them, Terraform, Bicep, Crossplane, Pulumi. There's multiple of them. It doesn't matter at the end that much which one of them you will choose. It's important to choose one of them and to use them wisely. Templating the stuff. Once you do something, then spend a bit more time on it. In that moment, it's a bit more time, but at the end, it will get back to you. If you spend a bit more time on that deployment of one workload and you make template from it, then with any other workload, you can reuse it. It's obvious, but during the timelines, during the sprints, it's sometimes forgotten. One of the important aspects, costs. That comes together with the orphaned resources, and it comes together with the tagging, because Azure has beautiful cost dashboards. They are showing nice data, especially how much we need to pay for the Azure. But if you don't have the breakdown for what are you paying, it's hard to understand what are the services that you are overpaying for, because by default you can just see, okay, which subscription is it, which type of workload or resource is it, but what does it tell you? If you see that this AKS cluster is like it costs you like this amount of money per month, what does that tell you? Do you know about by that you are overspending on that cluster or not? Do you know if it's orphan resource or not? So it's really important to also tag all of the resources by your cost centers, by your application tags. Yeah, it depends how you manage your deployments and the ITSM processes basically. But it's important to take all of the resources, because then if you look over not just the resource types, but you group the cost by the tags, you can easily find out, okay, so this application from this team costs this amount of money. And you can look on later on to more detail why it's that. Yeah, and you can differentiate between the services much more. Last but not least is the drift detection. Drift detection, it's something which is not that usually spoken about in the IAC, but it's also an important thing to keep in mind, because IAC and infrastructure as code, it's beautiful. It can save us a lot of time during creating infrastructure. It's great to templatize the stuff. But most of the tools by default doesn't solve you the problem of someone going to the portal and manually clicking there and changing the stuff. And then you ended up having different state of the infrastructure, which is currently running, and different state of the infrastructure as code, which you have described in your repository or whenever you store your code. That's usually happening, and that's usually a problem. There are ways how to prevent that. There are ways how to detect that, but it's important to keep in mind also. Because I mentioned a lot of stuff, but actually what are the easiest things and the fastest things you can right now look on and start with them? It's templatization. Yeah, just look over your deployments, look over what you have right now. If you already have infrastructure as code, look over your code and try to find the patterns. Believe me, they will be there most probably. If you have more than 5, 10 applications, they will be there. And these parts of the code, these parts of the deployments could be templatized to save time in the future. The consistent tagging in terms of the cost, which I just described a couple of minutes ago, that's important. Otherwise, you will not be able to determine what applications are costing you money. Resource sweep. Dedicate time, go over what you have. Time to time, once a week, once a month, take a look on what you have there and spend some time on it to finding out that if you don't have, if these applications are really in use, if they are not just forgotten, it's happening, and then it could cost like, sometimes it could be just like a couple bucks, but sometimes it could be thousands of dollars. And one obvious thing, instance optimization. There are a couple of ways how to save money on actual workload. It's not applicable for all of the Azure resources, mostly onto the workloads, but there are ways how to save money on that, either through reserved instances or through spot instances. It's worth it of taking a look at them and spending some time on it. One thing before I will move to other topic, I almost forgot, is that we got another pool from the previous slide, and that's where you are currently on the automation maturity curve. And it's beautiful that we have at least one using shared templates, reusable IC for most of the workloads. That's awesome. That's a great start. And we have a couple of answers to mostly manually clicking the portal. Spend time on it, take a look on it. It's worth it. It's fine in the beginnings, and don't be ashamed that a lot of the deployments are done manually through the portal. It's totally fine. It's great beginning of doing POCs, but then during the proper migration, it's great to take a look on the other things also there. Where we as a CloudBooster step in. I mentioned in the beginning them from a company called Cloudbooster. We are not providing only professional service and consultancy as all the other partners, but we have our own product called Cloudbooster, and that's basically a platform for optimization of deployment of the infrastructure. We are living in between of your engineering team and your developers and the Azure platform. By that, what I mean is that we ship all of the templates that I was mentioning through our platform, so they are ready for you to be used, and you don't need to spend time on building them, and you can just utilize them to right away use them and save time on migrating or creating new workloads in your environment. What you get with us on the first day, are the landing zones, heavily mentioned. are the workload templates for multiple kinds of workloads, AKS clusters, container instances, VM skill sets, all of these covered together with the databases, and also important, the deployment, the CI/CD part to the workloads. Yes, and we are getting to the end of my presentation. So I already see there are a couple of questions in the chat, which is awesome, and thank you very much for that. Before jumping to the Q&A, what you can get in next 2 days right away, and what could be your checklist? There are a couple of things. First, you can register for our automation playbook because right now we had just like limited time of 30 minutes, and it was really hard for me to just gather a couple of like the main thoughts and important facts to the presentation. So you can register for our automation playbook, which will be published in following weeks. You can also schedule with me or with my colleagues automation audit, which is something we do for companies. Usually it costs like 2,000 euros, but as you are one of the visitors of this webinar, one of the attendees, we decided to give it for everyone here for free. In this in this session, we basically, it's a comprehensive workshop in person or remote, depends on the location and everything. We look on how you currently deploying your applications, how you do the migration, depends in which phase you are, and we do the audit on it. If there is a room to save a time, to more optimize the workloads, or if there is actually all the security requirements fulfilled. And one of the last things, we are doing consultations and strategy planning for migrations for companies. That's also one of the things you can book on the session for. And with that, we are coming to the end. It was a pleasure for me to speak here and to have the webinar. And now it's time for questions. I can see that there is already a couple of them in the chat. We can answer them. Let's go from the first ones. So from Marco Lepikut, I hope I pronounce your last name correctly. So there was a question, what's the build exactly? In the presentation where I had a slide, the build was meant workload and one environment. Basically, like in terms of the slide, it was meant like one application in one environment deployment. Because usually you have application that needs to be deployed in a couple of environments, production, stage, dev, pre-prod, or how you can call it. And by the build was mean one deployment of that application. And I see thumbs up in the chat. Perfect. Setting up environment pipelines or etc. Oh, clicked, answered on it. Marco, maybe can you give me a bit more context about that question about setting up environment pipeline, etc., or what did you exactly meant by that? Meanwhile, we can move on to the next one and get back to you, Marco. From Anya, from the tools that you mentioned, which one in your experience are best for scale-ups? So in terms of which tool is the best one for the scale-ups, I would say Terraform, even that maybe Ale, our great partner and colleague from Microsoft, will not be that happy that I didn't mention Bicep, but I think he will forgive me that. I would say Terraform because it's the most commonly used infrastructure as code tool. Of course, if you are already more nature in the Kubernetes, it's also great to look on Crossplane, which basically takes the Terraform code to the Kubernetes, so you have the remediation and drift detection right away. But the great starting point is the Terraform and Terraform modules for templatizing your deployments. I hope I answered your question. And we got the reply from Marco. It was just elaboration. I worried that maybe my question was too short. Yeah. I'm still not sure if I exactly mean to which one you mean, but in terms of the environment pipelines, if I will look on it from the perspective of deploying to the environments, of course, right now I was talking mainly about creating and building environments for the applications. But then there is the second part of deploying your application to these environments. And for that, of course, it depends which type of workload you have. If you have Kubernetes, one of the best ways how to do it, it's a GitOps, GitOps basically standards, or it's a way how to do the things. It's not just one technology, but one of them is Argo CD, which basically allow you to have deterministic state of your deployments in Git repositories to be deployed to the clusters. If you have container instances or VMs, you may utilize Ansible or just CI/CD in its own, but it really depends on the workload. In terms of creating the environments, of course, once you templatize your deployments, then you can have even a pipelines to create like automation on top of the template to create the environments, for example, through CI/CD. So yes, it's great to do it, and it's if you have Terraform modules and Terraform code, you can then have a pipeline to spin up those environments using the Terraform. In a Git context, build usually refers to each pipeline execution output. That was confusing. Sorry. It wasn't meant exactly based on the like pipeline execution output. It was meant like the unit of workload and one environment of that workload. Of course, in a pipelines the build it's a bit different, right? I meant workload environment. Another question we have from Olga, and that's, can you share more about Kubernetes we are currently considering? So that's a topic for which we could be here for another webinar or another 2 hours. But basically Kubernetes, if I will try to just quickly describe it, when to decide for it, and when it's not when is the right time for it, and when it's not exactly the right time, it's that when you have ideally, like either when you have a lot of microservices, that's usually the best thing to consider, or when you have multiple applications which could be deployed through, like which could be Dockerized and deployed as a Docker containers, and you have multiple of them, then it's great time to consider Kubernetes, because what basically Kubernetes is capable of doing, it's managing across multiple nodes, which are VMs basically at the end underneath Docker containers, and it ships all of the tooling around for managing their placement across the zones, across the nodes, and their scaling, their auto scaling on top of that. If you will not use Kubernetes, you will need to do it a bit more manually, but it's also possible. When it's not the right time, it's when you don't have enough applications. Basically, if you depends on the scale, if you have just like 2 or 3 containers, 2 or 3 applications, in that moment, it could be a bit overkill, maybe, depends on the use case and on the context, but it's not all the time like the best thing to do. Like at the end, as in all the IT departments and all technologies, the concept of no silver bullet still applies. And thank you, Roman. Roman just shared one of our articles on our blog, which is exactly talking about more when and in which situations it's great to consider Kubernetes and when not. So thanks for it, Roman. And Olga, I hope I answered your question. Thank you. Awesome. So you are now to the questions that were in the chat so far. Is there anything else you would like to ask? Sorry. Anyway, as I mentioned, also on the screen right now, there is a QR code for booking a session with me or with my colleague. You can freely book it. It's a 30-minute session. We can discuss anything regarding your workloads, regarding your Azure environments, and then help you eventually. All right, I don't see any new questions. So probably if you don't have any other questions, we can end up here. We fit in the time. We have still some time left, but it's all right. So first of all, thank you very much for attention. It was a pleasure to present to you. And yeah, hopefully we will see each other on the other webinar in next month or on the call together. Thank you very much and have a nice day.